In the summer of 1882, I was on board the Viking, a Norwegian sealer, which was caught in the ice off that part of the east coast of Greenland, which is still unexplored, or more precisely, somewhere in the neighborhood of latitude 6650 north. For more than 3 weeks, we were absolutely fixed, and every day, to the terror of the crew, we drifted nearer to the rocky coast. Behind the fields of floating ice lay peaks and glaciers, glittering in the daylight. And at evening and through the night, when the sun sank lowest and set the heavens in a blaze behind them, the wild beauty of the scene was raised to its highest. Many times a day from the maintop, where my glasses turned westwards, and it is not to be wondered at that a young man's fancy was drawn irresistibly to the charms and mysteries of this unknown world. Unceasingly did I ponder over plans for reaching this coast, which so many had sought in vain. And I came to the conclusion that it must be possible to reach it, if not by forcing a ship through the ice, which was the method tried hitherto, then by crossing the floes on foot and dragging one's boat with one. One day, indeed, I incontinently proposed to make the attempt and walk over the ice to shore alone, but this scheme came to nothing because the captain conceived that he could not, in the circumstances, allow anyone to leave the ship for a length of time. On my return, I was asked to write an article in the Danish Geografisk Tidsskrift, and in this I expressed it as my opinion that it would be possible to reach the east coast of Greenland without any very great difficulty if the expedition forced their way as far as practicable into the ice on board a Norwegian sealer, and then left the ship and passed over the floes to shore. I will not say that I had not at this time some notion more or less visionary of penetrating from the coast into the interior. But it was not till a later occasion that the idea took a definite form. One autumn evening in the following year, that is to say 1883, I remember it still as if it were only yesterday. Or maybe just a little while ago. Ice, baby. I was sitting and listening indifferently as the day's paper was being read. Suddenly, my attention was roused by a telegram which told us that Nordenskjold had come back safe from his expedition to the interior of Greenland, that he had found no oasis, but only endless snowfields, on which his laps were said to have covered on their ski. As these implements and their use will be treated of at length in Chapter 3, it will only be necessary here to introduce them. Introduce the terms to the reader. Ski, literally a billet or thin slip of wood, and connected etymologically with the English skid and scheid in the Norwegian name for the form of snowshoe in general use among the northern nations of the old world. The pronunciation of the word in Norway may be considered practically identical with the English she. The compounds of the word which will occur in the course of the narrative are skilober, a snowshoer, and skilobning, snowshoeing, both formed from the verb lobe, to run. The only reason why the established English term snowshoe should not have been employed throughout is that this course would have led to inevitable confusion with the very dissimilar Indian snowshoe, of which also frequent mention is made. I remember it still as if it were only yesterday. I was sitting and listening indifferently as the day's paper was being read. Suddenly my attention was roused by a telegram which told us that Northern Skjold had come back safe from his expedition to the interior of Greenland, that he had found no oasis but only endless snowfields, on which his laps were said to have covered on their ski an extraordinary long distance in an astonishingly short time. The idea flashed upon me at once of an expedition crossing Greenland on ski from coast to coast. Here was the plan in the same form in which it was afterwards laid before the public and eventually carried out. My notion, put briefly, was that if a party of good skilobers were equipped in a practical and sensible way, they must get across Greenland if they began from the right side, this latter point being of extreme importance. For if they were to start, as all other expeditions have done, from the west side, they were practically certain never to get across. They would have all the flesh spots of Egypt behind them, and in front, the unexplored desert of ice and the east coast, which is little better. And furthermore, if they did get across, they would have the same journey back again in order to reach home. So it struck me that the only sure road to success was to force a passage through the floe belt, land on the desolate and icebound east coast, and thence cross over to the inhabited west coast. In this way one would burn all one's ships behind one. There would be no need to urge one's men on, as the east coast would attract no one back, while in front would lie the west coast with all the allurements and amenities of civilization. There was no choice of routes, forward being the only word. The order would be death or the west coast of Greenland. Not till the autumn of 1887, Not till the autumn of 1887 did I resolve to give my serious attention to the scheme. My original idea had been to carry out the expedition with private means, but as I was strongly urged on more than one side to apply to the Norwegian University for the necessary funds, in order to give the expedition a more public and national character, I consented and sent to the authorities an application for a grant of 5,000 kroner, or rather more than 275 pounds, in aid of a journey on the lines I have already described. My application received the warmest support from the University Council and was passed on to the government for their consideration, and in order that the proposal might be laid by them before the Storting, or National Assembly, in the regular manner. The government, however, answered that they could not see their way to give the scheme their support, and one of the newspapers even went so far as to maintain that there could be no conceivable reason why the Norwegian people should pay so large a sum as 5,000 kroner in order to give a private individual a holiday trip to Greenland. Most people who heard of the scheme considered it simple madness, asked what was to be got in the interior of Greenland, and were convinced that I was either not quite right in the head or simply tired of life. Luckily, it was not necessary for me to procure help from the government, Storting, or anyone else. At this time, I received an offer from a gentleman in Copenhagen to provide the sum for which I had applied to government. This was Herr Ostens Gammel, Herr Augustin Gammel, who had already contributed to the cause of Arctic research by the equipment of the Dijumfna expedition. This offer, coming as it did from a foreigner and one quite unacquainted with me personally and in aid of an expedition which was generally considered to be the scheme of a madman, seemed to me so truly generous that I could not for a moment hesitate to accept it. I first published my plan in January 1888 in the Norwegian magazine Naturen in an article entitled Grönlands Indlandsis. Having given some account of the earlier attempts to penetrate the interior of Greenland, I continued. My plan, described briefly, is as follows. With 3 or 4 of the best and strongest skillobers, I can lay my hands on, to leave Iceland in the beginning of June, on board a Norwegian sealer, make for the east coast of Greenland and try in about latitude 66 north, to get as near to the shore as possible. I should have liked to land farther north, in the unknown regions of Scoresby Fjord, but for this it would be necessary to hire a special vessel, and as it would probably be difficult to raise funds for this purpose, I have for the present given up this idea. If our vessel is not able to reach the shore, though the sealers, who have often been close in under this unexplored coast, do not consider such a thing improbable, the expedition will leave the ship at the farthest point that can be reached and will pass over the ice to land. I can't wait for you to hear my symphony. It's so beautiful. It would break your heart. Just as beautiful as you are. That's why you break my heart. All the time. In the summer of 1884, for instance, there was extremely little ice, and the seal were taken almost close under the shore, for the purpose of crossing the open water which will probably be found near the coast. A light boat will be dragged on runners over the ice. That such a crossing of the ice is possible, I feel I can assert with confidence from my previous experience. When I was in these regions in 1882 on board the Viking, and we were caught in the ice and drifted for 24 days along the very coast where I now intend to land, I had numerous opportunities while out shooting and for other purposes of becoming familiar with the nature of the ice and conditions of snow, and besides we were often obliged by sudden nips or jamming of the ice to drag our boats over the floes for considerable distances. I therefore think there is every probability of our being able to reach land in this way. I should like it to be for preference somewhat north of Cape Dan, where the coast has never yet been explored by Europeans, and offers in itself much of interest to the traveler. To the south, the coast is now comparatively well known as the Danish Konebad expedition under Captain Holm in 1884. Under Captain Holm in 1884, reached the point to the north of Cape Dan and wintered at Angmagsalik, a colony of heathen Eskimo in the neighborhood of the Cape. After having examined the coast as far as the time at our disposal will allow, we shall begin the crossing of the inland ice at the first opportunity. If we reach land to the north of Cape Dan, we shall begin the ascent from the end of one of the fjords close by. If we land farther south, we shall push up to the end of Sermilik Fjord before we take to the ice. We shall try at once to climb as high as possible on the bare rock, even if the gradient be considerably steeper. For when we are eventually obliged to take to the ice, we shall thus find it flatter and smoother, and shall escape the worst ice falls of the glaciers, which, with their crevasses and general roughness, would be likely to prove troublesome and dangerous. Once upon the ice, we shall set our course for Christian Shab on Disco Bay, and try to reach our destination as soon as possible. The advantage of making for Disco Bay instead of taking a point farther south is that we shall probably find the snow in better condition farther north. And besides, by Disco Bay, where the land is not much cut up by fjords, it will be comparatively easy for us to find our way to habitations, while Disco Island, which lies off the coast and will be visible to us with its terraced basalt cliffs, will prove a good landmark and help us to find one of the two colonies, Jacob's Haven or Christian Schab, which lie on Disco Bay about 35 miles apart. The distance from the point on the east coast where I intend to land in Disco Bay is about 670 kilometers or 420 miles. If we calculate that we shall be able to cover on a daily average from 15 to 20 miles, which is exceedingly little for a ski lober, the crossing will not take more than a month, and if we carry with us provisions for double that time, there seems to be every probability of our success. The provisions will have to be hauled on sledges of one kind or another, and besides the ski, we shall also take truger, the Norwegian counterpart of the Canadian snowshoe, which may serve our purpose better when the snow is wet and soft. We shall also, of course, take the instruments necessary for observations, etc., etc. It is not to be wondered at that several more or less energetic protests against a plan of this kind appeared in the newspapers, but they were one and all distinguished by an astonishing ignorance of the various conditions of and the possibility of passage over extensive tracts of ice and snow. In this connection, I cannot deny myself the pleasure of reproducing some portions of a lecture delivered in Copenhagen by a young Danish traveler in Greenland and printed in the Danish magazine Nyjord for February 1888. Other plans, the lecturer says, have never passed beyond the stage of paper, like the proposals to cross the inland ice in balloons which were brought forward at the end of the last century. And among these paper schemes we must include the proposal which has just emanated from the Norwegian zoologist Fridtjof Nansen of the Bergen Museum. There is much that is attractive in the fundamental idea of Nansen's scheme. In his proposal to start from the east coast and cross to the colonies on the other side instead of taking the reverse way, and in his intention, he being a good ski lover himself, to make ski his means of conveyance, but all who acknowledge the merits of the fundamental idea must, if they know anything of the real condition of things, refuse any further sanction to the scheme. The very method by which Nansen proposes to reach the coast, that is to say, by abandoning the firm ship's deck and creeping like a polar bear from one rocking ice floe to another on his way to the shore, shows such absolute recklessness that it is scarcely possible to criticize it seriously. Let us suppose, however, that fortune favors the brave and that Nansen has reached the east coast of Greenland. How will he now set about getting up onto the real flat expanse of the inland ice? Or, in other words, how will he pass the outer edge where peak upon peak rise through the ice mantle? Peak upon peak. Rise through the ice mantle. And in all probability present at nearly every point an impenetrable barrier. Page 8. Nansen's proposal to climb the high mountains of the coast and from their summits step upon the expanse of ice which is dammed up against them, thus betrays absolute ignorance of the true conditions. With what can be seen from the shore, my experience ends, and I will not attempt to criticize the idea of crossing the inner tract of ice on ski, or the possibility of taking enough provisions, or any similar questions, but I think that there is a probability that this part of the scheme may be carried out if Nansen can once pass the outer edge of the ice. But there is one very different question on which I think I am not only qualified but bound to speak, and I say that, in my opinion, no one has the moral right, by setting out upon a venturesome and profitless profitless undertaking to burden the Eskimo of Danish East Greenland with the obligation of helping him out of the difficulty in which he has wantonly thrust himself. The few of us who know anything of the condition of things in East Greenland have no doubt that if Nansen's scheme be attempted in its present form, and the ship does not reach the coast and wait for him till he has been obliged to abandon his design, the chances are 10 to 1 that he will either uselessly throw his own and perhaps others' lives away, or that he will have to take refuge with the Eskimo and be conducted by them along the coast down to the Danish colonies on the western side. And I say that no one has a right to force upon the East Greenlanders a long journey which will be in many ways injurious to them. There is no doubt that these passages were written with every good intention, but they are nevertheless characteristic specimens of the almost superstitious terror with which many people, and among them some who pose as authorities and claim to have special knowledge of the subject, have regarded the, quote, inland ice, unquote, of Greenland and the passage of tracts of ice and snow generally, even in these latter days. The writer of the above article had himself, in the course of several years' exploration, passed along the edge of the inland ice, but it seems never to have entered it into his head to make a little incursion into the interior. The first few steps would certainly have cleared his mind of some of his absurd hallucinations, and he would eventually have learned that an absolute ignorance of the true conditions really means. No. And he would have eventually learned what an absolute ignorance of the true conditions really means. In another article, which betrays, if possible, even less knowledge of the subject, the writer declared that even if Nansen himself were mad enough to make any such attempt, he would not get a single man to accompany him. In England, too, the press delivered itself of several articles adverse to the plan of the expedition. My legs have fallen asleep. Pretty girls, will you wait for me? But in spite of these warning voices, and in spite of the general opinion that the whole scheme was simple madness, there were nevertheless plenty of men who wished to join me. I received more than 40 applications from people of all sorts of occupations, including soldiers, sailors, apothecaries, peasants, men of business, and university students. There were many others, too, who did not apply, but who said they were more than eager to go, and would have sent in their names had it been of the slightest use. Nor were these applicants all Norwegians, for I have received many letters, too, from Danes, Dutchmen, Frenchmen, and Englishmen. I could, however, take none who were not thoroughly accustomed to the use of ski, and men, too, of proved energy and endurance. Proved energy and endurance. Finally, I chose 3 Norwegians: Otto Sverdrup, a retired ship's captain, Oluf Dietrichson, first lieutenant in the Norwegian infantry, and Christian Christiansen, Trana, a peasant from the north of Norway. As I had originally thought of taking reindeer, and imagined besides that some Lapps would be of use to me as possessing that sense of locality and power of adaptation to all sorts of circumstances which such children of nature have as a common birthright, I had written to 2 well-known men living in Finnmarken, asking them if they could find me a couple of mountain Lapps, as many who have traveled in the north of Norway and Sweden will know. The Lappish population falls into several more or less distinct divisions. The most interesting section, the real nomadic Lapps of the reindeer herd, and skin tent, form as a matter of fact a small part of the whole. They are commonly known in Norway as fjeldlapper, mountain laps, LAPPS. And it was from among them that I had intended to take my 2 men. Far the greater number of the laps are settled either on the Norwegian coast as solapper, sea laps, where they maintain themselves chiefly by fishing, or in the interior at such villages or centers as Karasjok, Kautokeino, Jokkmokk, Kvikkjokk, and Karesuando, as well as in most of the upper valleys of northern Sweden. The Elvlapper, river laps, Elv, river, to whom I refer below in connection with Balto's origin, are merely a small colony settled by the river Tana, and are, as I have said, supposed to be of mixed Lappish and Finnish blood. I had written to 2 well-known men living in Finnmark and asking them if they could find me a couple of mountain laps willing to join the expedition. I stipulated that they should be plucky men who were known to be clever mountaineers and to possess powers of endurance above the average, that they should be made fully aware beforehand of the dangerous nature of the undertaking, and that the fact must be clearly impressed upon them that there was just as much probability of their never returning home again as of surviving. And I further added that they must be unmarried men of an age between 30 and 40, as I considered that at this time of life the powers of both body and mind are best prepared to meet the trials of such an undertaking. It was a long time before I received an answer to my inquiry. The post among the inland districts of Finnmarken is leisurely, and it's taken across the mountains in reindeer sledges every fortnight. At last, when the time fixed for our start was approaching, I received an answer telling me that I could have 2 good men from Karasjok if I was willing to pay them handsomely. I accepted their terms and telegraphed to them to come at once. The next thing I heard was that they were on the way and would arrive on such and such a day. I was exceedingly anxious to see them, of course. They were expected one Saturday evening, and I had some people down at the station to meet them and take them to their lodgings. But no Lapps arrived that day or on Sunday either, and we all wondered what had become of them. Then, Monday I was told that they really had come, and so indeed they had, but by a goods train instead of the ordinary express for passengers. I hurried down to their lodgings at once, found their door, and as I entered saw, standing in the middle of the room, a good-looking young fellow, but more like a Finn than a Lapp, and away in the corner an old man with long black hair hanging about his shoulders, small in stature, and looking more stunted still, as he sat huddled up on a chest. He had a much more genuine Lappish look about him than the other. As I came into the room, the elder man bent his head and waved his hand in the oriental manner, while the younger greeted me in the ordinary way. The old fellow knew very little Norwegian, and most of my conversation was with the younger. I asked him how they were and why they came by the goods train. "We do not understand trains," answered he, "and besides it was a little cheaper." "Well, how old are you both?" "I am 26, and Ravna is 45, was the answer. This was a pretty business, for I had stipulated that they should be between 30 and 40. You are both mountain Lapps, I suppose?" "Oh no, only Ravna. I am settled at Karasjok." This was still worse, as I had made a point of their being mountain Lapps. But are you not afraid to go on this trip?" said I. "Yes, we are very much afraid. And people have been telling us on the way that the expedition is so dangerous that we shall never come home alive. So we are very much afraid indeed." This was really too bad, for the poor fellows had never even been told what they had undertaken to do. I was very much inclined to send them back, but it was too late to get anyone else to take their place. So as I had to keep them, it was best to console them as well as I could and tell them that what people had been saying was all rubbish. It was no manner of use to discourage them at the outset, for they were likely to lose their spirits quite quickly enough anyhow. Though they did not perhaps look quite so strong and wiry as I could have wished, still they seemed to be good-natured. and trustworthy fellows. These qualities, indeed, they have shown to the utmost, and in endurance they have proved little, if at all, inferior to us. In other aspects, I found them of no particular use, as far as the accomplishments which I expected to find in them are concerned, and as a matter of fact, they were never used for reconnoitering purposes. Balto, my younger lap, on his return home, wrote a short account of his experiences while he was away. This has been translated into Norwegian from the original Lappish by Professor Fries of Christiania, and I propose to include it in my narrative. I propose to include in my narrative those passages of his which seem to be, to me, most characteristic and likely to afford most interest to the general reader. After describing his voyage from Finnmarken and telling how people on the way discouraged them and informed them, among other things, that I was a simple maniac, he continues, on April 14th, we left Trondheim and reached Christiania. On the 16th, Nansen had sent a man on the railway station to meet us. This was Sverdrup, who came up to us and asked, "Are you the two men who are going with Nansen?" We answered that we were the two. Sverdrup then told us that he was going with Nansen too, and had come on purpose to meet us. "Come along with me," he said, and he took us to a hotel which is in Toldbodgaden, number 30. An hour afterwards, Nansen and Dietrichson came to see us. It was a most glorious and wonderful thing to see this new master of ours. It was a most glorious and wonderful thing to see this new master of ours. Nansen. He was a stranger, but his face shone in our eyes, like those of the parents whom we had left at home. So lovely did his face seem to me, as well as the welcome with which he greeted us. All the strange people were very kind and friendly to us, two Lapps, while we were in Christiania town, and from this time we became happier, and all went well with us. And from this time we became happier, and all went well with us. I was trying to figure out how I should blow you a kiss, but I can't, so I'm just gonna say that.